And welcome back to the Late for Loadin podcast. I'm Chris. I'm here with my co-host Josh. And on today's episode, we have Brian Fair of Shadows Fall. And I know the saying goes, don't ever meet your idols, but I grew up idolizing both Brian and his band Shadows Fall. I know they were so big for both Josh and I when we were really getting into the metal scene. And I would definitely call him an idol. And I would definitely say that he was everything that I would have hoped that he would be and more. Just straight up the coolest guy on the planet.
He was I couldn't believe how cool he was. And being able to see the hair through the screen. Because I remember at Ozfest back in the day seeing him on stage and the hair was just it was something out of a movie almost.
It's iconic.
You don't see that every day. So it was awesome having him on.
Yeah, and it's like you and I didn't know him before we recorded this episode, and it felt so comfortable. And we had just catching up with an old friend almost. It was really cool. But we get into things like talking about how the Boston hardcore scene played a huge role in shaping who Brian is and his approach to music in general, and really how impactful the New England hardcore metal scene really was for all of heavy music in the early 2000s, and really how it shaped a lot of what a lot of bands do these days.
It was really cool getting into his side of the life after touring and seeing and hearing that perspective and being able to weigh it against what my life after touring was, even getting to discuss learning that he was a soccer dad and is out there on the sideline yelling and carrying on just like I do. So it was really neat to get into that stuff. And then learning about how skateboarding still serves as a vital outlet for him. And if I had to get on a skateboard these days, I'd be terrified. So,
that's guaranteed cool broken limbs for me.
Absolutely. So it was really neat to hear him talk about how he still goes for it.
Yeah, and as we're talking about dad stuff,
there she is,
my little lady running through here making an appearance.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it's was really cool that he has seen pretty much every side of what it means to be in a band. He did the early days of grinding in a van all the way up to touring with multiple buses.
Being nominated for a Grammy,
signing to a major label, all the way down to going back and just kind of living in the quote unquote real world for a few years after experiencing just total and extreme burnout from all the grinding this, because they had to have been one of the most hardest touring bands of that era of bands. And he tells us about how they had this attitude of put us in front of any crowd and we'll scare the new metal out of you. It was one of my favorite things anybody's ever said to me, even as a guy who grew up loving new metal. I just thought that was hilarious. So all around, this is probably one of my favorite episodes we recorded. He was just cool. He was just such a good guy, such a fun hang, and I think that everybody's really going to enjoy this one. So
me too.
On that note, enjoy this episode with Brian Fair of Shadows Fall. This episode of Late for Loadin is brought to you by rockabilia.com, your go-to destination for 100% official band merchandise. No bootlegs, no cheap knockoffs, just authentic gear straight from the bands you love. From metal and punk to classic rock and beyond, Rockabilia has over 500,000 items in stock. T-shirts, hoodies, hats, patches, and even rare, hard-to-find collectibles. If you're looking for something exclusive, Rockabilia drops brand new limited edition merch every month. So if you see something you like, grab it before it's gone. And in fact, we just placed an order for some new merch ourselves. I picked up a very, very cool Linkin Park Meteora hoodie. Josh, did you grab something?
Yeah, I grabbed a couple things. I got a super limited Eminem tour shirt, and then what you mentioned not missing out. I saw a Meatloaf tour shirt from 2005 that I really, really wanted. Unfortunately, I didn't have my size, so I missed out on that one.
Well, there you have it. Don't wait. Our friends at Rockabilia are hooking up Late for Loadin listeners with 10% off when you use code LOAD at checkout. So if your band tee collection needs a refresh and you want to support the artists who make the music we love, hit up rockabilia.com, load up your cart, and drop in code LOAD, LOAD, for that sweet discount. Now let's roll today's show. All right, Brian Fair, welcome to the Late for Loadin podcast. Thanks for taking a little bit of time out of your day to chat with us goofballs over here.
No problem. Totally. Glad I made it. I'm usually late for loading always because I'm a singer, so I avoid that shit like a plague, man. You know. No, actually, I'm one of the singers who gets kicked out of the union because I actually do help load. So, you know.
Oh, No, don't say that out loud.
Yeah,
People are going to turn their back on you immediately. What kind of rock star are
gonna,
you, dude?
I'm gonna lose my card, man, in the frontman union.
Or being a legend in the scene, you're gonna set the precedence for the new singers who think that they can't load in.
That's a goal. I'm trying to school youth, but also I'm just trying to get free beers from the drummers and the bass players of the world who are like, oh, dude, I can't believe you carried in that kick drum case. Thank you so much.
Well, you know what? Respect, because I've met plenty of singers who definitely think that they're above that. But, you know, it is what it is. I don't judge. I just move on with my life and do my own thing.
Just keep it moving, man. That's the philosophy of life. Just keep it moving, man.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. Well, I guess first and foremost, before we get into any sort of business, how's life been in general? I know you were on like a Rockstar Dad weekend trip. What was that about?
Yeah, it's been a little hectic. Flew out to Albany for the Extreme Music Awards. Albany does this like kind of local music awards thing every year for the like heavier side of stuff, and it was amazing, man. There was an all-star jam where I'm literally playing Megadeth tunes and look to my left and there's Dave Ellefson and you know Gary Holt's playing guitar and we're doing Raining Blood. I'm like doing Slayer and Megadeth covers with dudes who are in Slayer and Megadeth.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Super cool. But then for me, I got to do a Leeway tune with Craig Ahead from Sick of It All and with Danny Diablo and Hoya singing backups. So for me as growing up a hardcore kid, Leeway being one of my favorite bands, getting to play it with a bunch of legends from New York City and from the New York hardcore scene was about as cool for me as it could get. So insane weekend, total whirlwind. And before I knew it, I was back home taking my daughter to soccer practice and back in 9 to 5, all within like a 20-hour range, So
I couldn't relate to that more. That's you're literally talking about my life, man. But you know what? It's like I was saying to you over text the other day, like that's the kind of chaos I'm totally cool with though. Like that's
100%.
all the best chaos all at once.
That's the whiplash I signed up for. Like I appreciate that whiplash, but it's also cool is like I'm at a point now where my kids also occasionally get to see I told you I was cool. Like I didn't know if they get to see that. So I'm like, so they appreciate me running around as long as they're like, oh well, he was cool. I didn't, we didn't believe.
Do you ever feel like you live a double life?
Oh,
because there's this extreme sense of normalcy when you're home, and then you're gone, and there is that chaos of that rock star lifestyle.
It totally especially you say you play like a festival, especially, which are always totally. such an insane experience. You're coming off stage from playing in front of 100,000 people or something. And before I know it, I'm literally yelling at some teenage ref about a call on a corner kick.
Man, I can't wait to get into that later because my son also plays soccer, and I'm that dad. I bought my wife a hat for Christmas that says "Sorry about my husband."
Yeah. So, and I'll say my wife might be the more vocal one. She played soccer her whole life pretty much till her ankle gave out. So we we're very supportive of all the kids' sports. And honestly, I'm always nice to the refs. So I gotta say they're making $8 an hour there to get yelled at by a bunch of rednecks. So I gotta
That's true.
That's true. Give them at least one little nod here and there. But sure. I love the back and forth because I was really burnt out on touring and being in a band after I've been in a band that's been actively touring since I was 15 years old. And that was straight until about 2014 when I was in my mid 40s, early 40s and needed a break. And home life became a sanctuary. And
totally.
But now to be able to do the music and touring on a schedule that's a lot less breakneck and a lot less profit driven and there's a lot less of an agenda, and then balancing the two is I couldn't be happier. I didn't think it was possible at first, but finding that balance has been amazing.
Yeah, it's great to hear. Listen, growing up in the New England area, what was the heavy music and hardcore music scene like when you were first getting into it?
Man, I got very lucky that I started going to Boston hardcore shows. I was probably 14, and it's all Mike D from Killswitch Engage, my old Overcast bandmates' fault. We met skateboarding, and he was going to see Leeway and Breakdown, and I think Only a Witness at the Channel, this club in Boston. And it was either 89 or 90. I forget. And the Channel at that time and Boston shows were insane. There was probably 1,000 people there for the show. The pit was the scariest thing I'd ever seen in my entire life. I had been going to arena shows my whole life. I started, I was at Bon Jovi's Slipper and Wet tour when I was 9. I saw all that shit. So
you went to concerts.
Yeah, concerts. So I was used to concerts and big production and
Yeah.
And you know, just larger than life stuff. So walking into the channel, I wasn't prepared for the chaos of that type of thing. No barricade, no anything. And
Yeah.
before I knew it, I was swinging off the light rig into the crowd, like Steve diving like a maniac, you know, and was very like lucky to be initiated into that scene at 14, you know. And from after that show, it was every weekend, you know. But it wasn't just big shows like in Boston. I was going to every suburban VFW hardcore show there was, and that started branching into death metal shows as well, and just literally just shows. And also our suburban scene, like I grew up about a half hour outside of Boston. There was a lot of these bands who were doing insanely innovative stuff at like crazy early ages. So my musical influences were coming from an insane melting pot of all these bands. Some who were doing like melodic, like verbal assault kind of style, Dag Nasty stuff. Some who were already bringing in death metal and thrash metal into it. And that scene spawned so many wacky bands like, you know, like Overcast and Converge, and all these bands came out of this tiny little, you know, scene because what we grew up seeing when we were kids was madness, you know. So
Sure.
super lucky. And also, honestly, being in Boston area, there was tons of shows there, but we were only an hour and a half drive to New Haven. We were only 3-hour drive to New York City. You know, it's silly if you could find someone to drive in 5 hours. We were hitting shows anywhere we could, and that was huge too. I think if you're stuck in a place where there maybe is like an immediate scene, but it's hard to drive. You know, if you grew up in St. Louis, you're like your next big city is Chicago, 6 hours away or something like that. It's a little different than where we could pop over to Rhode Island in 40 minutes and, you know, go to shows there. So you saw a lot of local scenes, and I think that was a huge part of why my musical tastes were crazy diverse, and I got to experience a lot of shows that were game changers, you know.
That's awesome. Yeah, and maybe I feel this way because I'm an East Coast guy too. I'm further south than you. I'm in Maryland, but I feel like a pretty big connection to all of the bands that came out of like the New England area. Like, is there something in the water with all of you New England people? Like, you know, so many like game changing and like massively influential bands came from that area of the country, and roughly around the same time too. Like, what the hell's going on up there?
It's crazy. I used to blame how bad the Red Sox and Patriots were for all our anger, and that's where all this aggressive. But then they started winning everything for like a decade, so that changed that. But honestly, I think it was the fact that it was a very like open scene sonically. Like there wasn't a in the early days there was that early Boston sound. It was like SSD, DYS, that like really fast, aggressive, you know, proto hardcore kind of thing. But by the time I was going in like 1990, you'd see shows that like had already had like thrash metal bands and hardcore bands and all that. And there was a lot mixed up, and the bands themselves were doing weird stuff stylistically. Like this band Eye for an Eye, who just actually recently got together and played a couple shows. They were doing almost like this funky hardcore thing that had so much groove and a level of musicianship that was so different than just like caveman bash, you know. And then there'd be like Only a Witness, who were bringing rock riffs to it and were so heavy, and the singer had this like soaring melodic voice, but it was still hard. So I think a lot of that pushed bands to kind of do their own thing. And that's why you had bands like Cave In and Converge and Overcast and Dive doing stuff that was bringing in a lot of influences, but didn't sound like each other. You know what I mean? Like there wasn't like a Boston sound. There was just like a bunch of bands doing shit that we didn't think at the time would anyone care or influence anything. Sure. And it went on to really, you know, like have some ripples through the whole, you know, just history of hardcore and metal. And I would joke, people see these flyers, they're like, yo, Converge, Cave In, Overcast. They're like, that show must have been insane. And I'm like, there was 40 people and it was in a barn in Hanover, Massachusetts. You know, like so. Yeah, I always love that, like the romanticizing of some of that shit. I'm like, yo, these shows sucked. You know what he's talking about?
Right,
totally.
Right.
So I mean, they were fun to play, but like, yeah, they were not these blockbusters, bodies flying everywhere. I'm like, no, man, that was in a coffee shop somewhere in Northampton, you know?
Right.
I have that conversation with some of these younger bands today. Like even now, there's so much expectation. Back then, we didn't give a fuck where we were playing. Put us in the van, get us to the show. It doesn't, as long as they got power, we're in, and 100%. It's going to be.
And sometimes you have to steal power from the house next door. You know, just run a fucking cable and just go for it.
But like as long as the shit worked.
There wasn't expectations of any sort of success, you know, in like the music world. Like it wasn't like that. Success was like, playing out of town, putting out a 7-inch
Right.
on a label that you'd always worshipped. You know, that was the stuff that mattered then. And I think that changed a lot when bands, hey, I'm glad it blew up and I was able to like do it for a living and have a career and make money and buy a house. Like that was amazing. But that wasn't why we started. I think once that happened, people started doing the like, well, if we take 2 parts Lamb of God, 1 part Hatebreed, we'll be huge, you know, like, whereas those bands before were like, yeah, no, we didn't, we were just trying to play out of state and, you know, maybe get some money for beer and food. And that was a good night, you know, so.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you've brought up Overcast a couple times now. At what point did you start Overcast or did you join Overcast?
Yeah, me and Mike started Overcast together. He had been in a few local hardcore bands, and he had some that had broken up. One was called GG Pelham and Grub Monkeys, one of the greatest band names of all time. And mostly they called their singer GG. It was last name with Pelham. They called him GG because he would like eat bugs and shit. I was like, that's barely even touching what GG would do. But anyway,
yeah, not even close.
I digress. You know, so he had riffs, and at the time, I played bass in a band that was kind of a mix of like Sex Pistols and like Skid Row. You know, like we were more like punky, rocky kind of stuff. And so I played bass. He played bass. He had riffs, so I was like, all right. He's like, well, you're better at skateboarding, so you're the singer. I'm like, okay. And I brought the drummer from my band Frenzy that I was playing at the time, and just the 3 of us without guitar jammed in my parents' garage. And so we had some songs, and then we brought in Pete on guitar, and he was the classic mullet metalhead and, you know, Nuclear Assault t-shirt. And we're like, perfect. Like, because we wanted to play hardcore, but we wanted a metal sounding guitar because we were super into Cro-Mags and all that stuff, you know? So once the 4 of us got together as the core in 1990, and then, you know, kind of went from there. So.
Sick. And then I guess at what point, so Shadows Fall was already a band. At what point did that come into the picture for you?
Yeah, they officially started in 96. So Overcast had been together for a little while where we were like, it's funny how then you were like OGs of your scene. Like if you were at it existed for 3 years, you know, because we're all, I was literally 14 or 15 when we started. So by the time I'm 18, I was just like, oh, back in the day when we started, you know, like 3 years ago. So they started kind of later on. And at that time, it's funny because I was getting super into like At the Gates and In Flames and a lot of Swedish metal. And I heard the first Shadows Fall stuff and was like, whoa. I was like, all right, these dudes are tapping into something that I've also been getting into. Overcast took Shadows Fall on their first ever tour outside of New England. It was the craziest tour ever. Overcast, Disembodied, Shai Hulud with Shadows Fall opening some shows. This band Section 8 from Albany opening some shows. And by the end of that tour, all the bands broke up except for Shai Hulud, but they only had 1 member left. So it was one of those hardcore tours where Matt Pike booked it. And at the time, I swear to God, he was just throwing darts and like figuring out where to go. And we have in one of the Overcast reissues, Mike found his original tour diary, and it has all the dates and then how much money we made on each show.
Nice.
And between the zeros and the $30, there's literally like a -12, and like, you know. And then there was the one Blockbuster in Worcester where we made $200, you know, or like back home.
Yeah.
Big money.
Yeah, totally. So, but it was, you know, stories from that tour and the friendships we made will last forever, but it was grueling. So I got to really know the Shadows Fall guys better on that run. And once things didn't work out with Phil, their singer, honestly, I was literally walking off stage at the last ever Overcast show, still sweaty, trying to find a dry shirt. And Matt's already asking me to like, hey man, you want to come and jam with the Shadows Fall guys? I'm like, bro, give me like 1 minute, you know, like let me dry off. Let me at least like enjoy a little bit of something that I've been in for 9 years that just died in front of me. I was like, give me a minute to mourn here.
Was there any pressure replacing Phil at all? Or
totally, because I the first record, the Somber Eyes record, he sounded amazing, and he had a much cleaner singing voice than I do. I'm way more Hetfield, Chuck Billy, and he. Which, although then I did also learn that Matt, the guitar player, was singing some of that stuff as well. So I was like, oh, good. I was like, I can't hit those notes. So that's you are good. You keep doing that. So yeah, I was definitely nervous, and they also musicianship level was high. So I was like, man, I'm a front man. I've never claimed to be a singer. Like I'm a front man, you know, so I was a little bit nervous for sure, but also after being in a comfort zone of your own band for 8 or 9 years. And at that point I was in my early 20s. That felt like it was a third of my life had been an Overcast. I was definitely nervous, but then I heard the 2 new songs they were working on, and it was actually the song Serenity and the song First Noble Truth that ended up being on the first Shadows Fall record I was on, Of One Blood. And I was like, okay, yeah, no, whatever. I'm in. I was like, this shit's amazing. I was like, this shit's amazing. Yeah. And I could tell they were going in a thrashier, less sort of 8-minute long death metal tune kind of direction. And I was like, cool, man. That's what I liked about what you guys did was the thrashy kind of melodic death metal stuff. So once we started jamming, the writing went really quick. And man, we were in the studio doing the first record and signed with Century Media off of a 2-song demo before I even knew what happened. Like I was literally Overcast stopped in December. By January, I was recording a demo. By March, we were already signed and working on an album. And it was just chaos.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. So
I also want to go back and touch on what you just said, where you said you're a front man, not a singer. Is that what you said?
yeah.
I think that's actually, there is definitely a distinction between the two. And I actually,
Definitely.
if I had to pick between a singer and a person who is a front man, I'm going front man all day, because that inherent, like, natural gift of being the guy who can go up and stand at the front of the stage and deliver an exciting show to a crowd, you can't teach that. Like, I don't care what anyone says, you can't teach that. It's got to be something that's in you. You can teach somebody to sing all day long. So
100%.
you know what I mean? Like I'm all for. I will go for the front man all day, any day, personally.
In this genre, I think it's definitely it takes a band to a different level if you have a front man that's engaging, it's acting with the crowd, it's getting into it, and you can't fake it. I'll tell you, people always ask me, like, how do you get in the game mode? I'm like, I don't know, man. It's been since day one. I get a mic in my hand in front of a crowd like that, and before I know it, I'm already walking on people's heads and like trying to swing off the chandelier that I was told by management not to touch, and like, you know, all that shit. So that's just how I've always. But it's also the shows I grew up in. That was it.
Yeah.
It was, the singer was just a part of the crowd more than in the band. So, but I did want to also, because I was playing with musicians who were at such a high level and the music was dictating certain things vocally, I did try to get better at the actual craft of singing. But I would have taken the front man side. I wouldn't, if that was the sacrifice, I'd be like, nah, man, I was being a hardcore band forever. Like, you know.
Sure. Where did you find that confidence from to get up there and be that front man?
Man, I have no idea, but my parents always joke that when I was in, I think it was 2nd grade, we had an indoor recess, and I don't really remember this because I probably blocked it out of my memories. Sure. I got up in front of the whole class and a cappella sang Air Supply's The One That I Love to entertain everybody during this indoor recess. And I wish I could still sing like Air Supply, because I can't hit those notes no more either. So I don't know. I guess it was always there. I'm a pretty soft-spoken person. I prefer to kind of just chill and like do my own thing. But when I get on a stage, man, I'm just like, I don't know, man. It clicks, some switch goes off, and that's that. It's like I don't curse a whole lot until I'm on stage. Everyone's a motherfucker, you know. Like,
yeah, of course. That's the mass hole coming out in you, though.
It's 100%. 100%.
At least you have a place for that escape. At least you have that, you know, that place to let that all out.
That was the one thing of I talk about being burnt out on touring, but when I got home first and did not tour for a while, I realized I don't get to yell at people for at least 40 plus minutes a night every night.
Yeah.
And that's a huge outlet of stress and energy and anger or frustration, whatever it is, joy. It doesn't matter. It's such an emotional release. Not having that, I had to find kind of other outlets. I started skateboarding a lot more again. I started working out a little bit crazier, doing like more crazy stuff. Trying, because I was like, well, the only other people I can yell at are like my kids and my wife, and they don't want anything to do with that. Yeah. You know, I'm on the gentle parenting kick. I can't do that, you know. So, but it is funny though. My kids know if they hear metal voice, they done fucked up. Like, you know, like,
yeah, totally.
they're already running for the rooms. The doors are closed, you know. But yeah, having that outlet is huge. So now getting to do it kind of periodically it's such a great like kind of release. And but I did it was also good to learn how to handle some of those emotions without necessarily that daily outlet as well. Like it was kind of like, okay, I can't just rely on, most people don't get to just scream at people for an hour a night, you know? So I gotta find, you know, a healthier way to do it sometimes.
I can oddly relate to that with I'm not sure if you know, but my band was in a pretty serious accident back in 2015. And you know, it's sidelined us for a long time, and having to figure out like who I am when I'm at home, you know, and I'm not leaving soon. I feel like I had my biggest period of like self-growth and like maturing in those years that we were stuck at home and recovering and figuring out how to, you know, live a daily life at home, and how me and my, at the time, my now my wife, but my fiance at the time, how we interact with each other on a day-to-day basis when I'm not halfway across the world. Like, I feel like I grew so much in those 3 years having to actually figure out how to be a real human. It was so bizarre. And I didn't realize that I had all of this stuff I needed to process until like everything around me is like, hey, you have to pause for a minute, figure your life out,
100%, man. But I always compare it to like, dude, I came off a pirate ship. I've been living like a fucking pirate, surrounded by actual animals like for years. So to come back into like regular society was like a shock, and I had to, like you said, it was a time of reflection, but also the identity of it. I didn't also want to be so tied up in I'm Brian from Shadows Fall. Because I didn't happen when Overcast was first breaking up. I was like, I've always been Brian from Overcast. Like, what do I do? I was like, do I do anything else? And so, but I didn't have to think about it a lot then because I jumped right into another band and boom, we were off and busier than I'd ever been in my life. And so it was a big wake up call and kind of shock to the system, but a very necessary and productive and healthy one as well. Because I think if I would have kept grinding, we could have dragged the corpse of the band along for a lot longer. And we were watching a lot of bands do that at the time, but it would have been selfishly feeding that kind of ego or the fear of I don't know what else to do. So I was like, well, I got to find something, and and it's definitely shifted, but it's made life a lot more balanced as well. Where if the plug got pulled tomorrow, it wouldn't be this panic response, So
the analogy of the pirate ship is crazy to me because it's so true.
Dude,
I just had never heard it referred to as the pirate ship, but holy shit.
Not only is the pirate ship, it's straight up Peter Pan ship. People are telling you just be the same kid you were when you were fucking, like in high school forever. And, like
Peter Pan's pirate ship
it's literally
fucking a tour bus.
And it even physically does it because Peter Pan, always never got old. And you look at some of these guys in your bands and you're like, how is no one aged yet? And it's like, we may be taking years off the back end. Living this lifestyle.
Definitely taking years off
young,
the back end.
Yeah, but we all still look young, and it's so weird. It's like, because we never got off the pirate ship, man. We never left Neverland.
It's so crazy. Speaking of taking years off the back end, I've been waiting to ask you this question. Are you still actively skating?
I'm not. I was on a huge skate renaissance for a while. I've slowed down a little bit recently. And a lot of it's just, recovery time is taking longer.
How does your body
there are certain things I have to be realistic about myself. Street skating does not exist in the way it used to. Like I'll hit the street part at the park a little, like, a little tiny ledge, but it's mostly just skate transition, skate park, cruising pools, knowing my limits. Well, but as soon as there's some dudes I skate with around here who get pretty rad, and you're like, it just starts inspiring you. And I see it happening, and just like sometimes like I gotta go home now. I was like,
totally.
I'm gonna try and do something.
We had this new skate park open up downtown here, and I live in Pensacola, Florida, and we had this new skate park open up, and I have not been to it yet, although I've wanted to go for a while.
Do it.
I feel like I'm afraid because I don't want to feel like I need to try something because I would be terrified to even ollie anymore.
The time to go is when it's totally just chill during, like a weekday earlier and just cruise around, man. And you'll get that feeling. You're like, this is so much fun.
I know.
But if dudes aren't feeling it, you're going to either be embarrassed to do anything or you're going to start getting a little ahead of yourself.
So Brian, a little context here. Josh and I grew up together and we actually played in our first band ever together. And we met skateboarding. So both of us grew up skating. And I stopped when I started getting serious about music because I started thinking I can't have a broken finger or arm or something.
On your wrist,
Exactly. And then during the pandemic, I actually started getting the itch to skate again. And I asked my wife for a skateboard for Christmas and she got me one. And I rolled down my road once and went, nope. I'm not cut out for it anymore. I don't have the balls that I used to have, and even just riding down my streets, like I'm for sure gonna break something, and I can't.
And health insurance and shit. Like I don't have health insurance. I can't worry. I can't be caught up in a hospital with a broken leg or ankle or something.
I will say every time I get out of the car and my wife sees me walk from the car to the house after the skate park, she's just like, "Oh, thank God," Yeah. She's waiting for that one time where I just can't get out of the car.
I recently joined a men's soccer league. Don't ask why. I have all the dads on my son's soccer team talked me into it. And every time I finish a game and I have no injury, I'm like,
Yeah, that's a victory, man, right there.
I made it through.
It's funny. I always tell myself I'm not going to get competitive with stuff like that. And like, our daughter's
inevitable.
team had to like, we're going to play the, the last thing we're going to practice. We're going to play the parents versus kids. The next thing I know,
Yeah.
I'm going just full scale, just sprinting like I haven't since I was in high school track.
Oh yeah.
Blasting up, trying to hit upper corners on the goal, just like going hard, and it's just, you can't help it. But with skateboarding, I've tempered it where I know my limits, but it's so much fun. Like I hope I'll keep doing it for as long as I can. During the pandemic, I was skating nonstop. I had the kids, my kids were both sort of skateboarding then. They kind of tapered off a little, but like my daughter was bombing hills with me and stuff at that time.
Oh, that's so
going
sick.
to these colleges near here that were ghost towns during the pandemic and just skating all these spots. It was fun, but yeah, I got to be realistic about it and just take it slow. But I swear, skateboarding shows it keeps me young, keeps me alive. I'm gonna be 50 this year, and which is insane to me that I made it a half a century. But I don't want to give those things up, or I feel like things will catch up way faster than I'm ready.
Yeah,
absolutely.
They keep you young. They keep you young.
Yes, indeed. Peter Pan, man.
There you go. Hey, do you remember your first memory falling in love with music?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yes. Well, it's kind of twofold. The first time I heard a band that made me kind of like, like pick my ears pricked up was, believe it or not, was Men at Work. The Business as Usual album blew my mind. Like I was just so into it. Music was always a part of like my family. Like they were always listening to oldies and 50s doo-wop and stuff. But nothing clicked. That really did. And I went and bought it with my own allowance money on vinyl and started a journey like finding my own music. But the real game changer was I went to see Bon Jovi, Slippery When Wet with Cinderella was opening up on the Night Songs.
Let's go.
Nice.
Let's go.
I walk into the arena and they opened with Night Songs and I saw Tom Kiefer and I literally looked at my friend and I was like, that's all I want to do. I was like, that's it.
Yes.
I was like, I don't care about anything. I was like, that's all energy is going into being that guy.
That fucking rules. I love that.
First of all, Night Songs. That is one of the heaviest doom metal songs of all time. I know they look like they're, all the teased hair and all the makeup and all that, but man, that riff goes hard.
Dude, there were riffs back then. They don't get enough credit. There was riffs back then.
That first album, man, riffs. Then they got Malala Blues a year later, but man, first Cinderella. It's funny, my band, I play in a band in St. Louis called Hell Night, and we're like sludgy, down-tuned, weird, just stuff. And we covered that song and just made it the evilest fucking thing ever. Like, so
sick.
So, which was a full circle moment for me, But yeah, dude, walked into that arena, saw Tom Kiefer, was like, I'm in. And then it's funny, I think I was like 30th row, like really good seats on the floor. As soon as Bon Jovi came on, every girl on the floor rushed the stage. And they all got thrown out and pushed away. And I moved up to like a 10th row, just like, all right.
Oh yeah, you're in business.
Yeah, watch them fly across on the Living on a Prayer, like on the wire. It was amazing. So.
Dude,
that's
so
crazy.
Sick. I want to ask you one of my favorite questions. I've had a couple chats with Rob from Chimera and also Doc from God Forbid, because the whole like new wave of American heavy metal era of heavy music was heavily inspirational to actually both Josh and I. A lot of the bands that got tossed in that category of bands were influential on us when we were getting into playing music. Did you know in the moment when it was first kicking off, like what kind of impact all of your bands were having, or is it something that you can see more so in hindsight now? Like, because I always wonder, like, and I actually said this to Rob specifically. I use the example of like when Metallica's making the Black Album. Does Metallica know they're making the Black Album? Do they know it's going to go on to sell 16 million copies, or do they just feel like, yeah, we like what we're doing right now? Like, was Shadows Fall aware of the impact that you guys are going to have on heavy music?
It's strange because I'll say making of One Blood, we were kind of like, we're really good at this. And I was like, this is a good record. But when we were working on The Art of Balance, we were like, this is a different sound. I was like, this is something different. And we were pretty cocky about like, if you give us a chance, we will scare the new metal out of you. Like we will just get us on Ozfest and we'll fucking show you that this is where it's at. And we believed it, because anytime we were opening for every death metal band there was, and we do great in those crowds. We play with hardcore bands and we do great in those crowds. We would open for like System of a Down or any of those bands, and we would destroy. So we're like, you know what? These kids are primed for like real metal. And, I think it would have this like, lasting impact or anything like that? Probably not. Like that wasn't really, but we just knew at the time, we're like, bring on any audience, put us on any tour and we will slay. We looked at it as almost like a sports team, like where we were like, yo, I'll give it any given Sunday, we can beat you. Like, even if you might have all the backing of the label, you might have all the production. We don't need any of it. We're going to come out and hit you in the mouth. And that's it, and it was proven to us on Ozfest 2003, which had a lot of, us, Killswitch, Chimera. And that half of it was like us, Sworn Enemy, all that. And then the other half was like third tier new metal bands who are all on major labels. And like,
we were there for that, by the way.
Josh and I attended that. Yeah.
Nice. One of the funnest summers of my entire life. But we also saw a change in the guard where like there were these bands who were on major labels and they're like talking about tour support and all this stuff. And we're like, what is tour? Huh? Like what is that? Right, we're all on indie labels and small labels and done everything ourselves. And every night the crowds were going insane for all like of our brand, like all our friends. And the other thing is all these bands realized they're like, how are you guys all buddies? We're like, dude, we came out of the same scene. We've been playing shows together at that point for almost, like 5, 6, 7 years, if not longer. Some of us, whether it was old bands or new bands, it didn't matter. It was like we all knew each other, and we rolled in like a gang, man. By the end of that tour, 4 of the new metal bands that were on there broke up, literally, and dropped off the tour and just disappeared. And what do? We brought in E-Town Concrete, and we brought in like more buddies, to take over. And by the next year, 2004, the whole second stage was all like new wave of American heavy metal or melodic death metal bands or Swedish metal bands. It didn't matter. Like it's just fully flipped.
I feel like after 2003, like 2004, 2005, 2006, like all 3 of those years were like basically run by all of the bands in I guess what would be considered the new wave of American heavy metal or the offshoot bands from
the
that era.
Stuff exactly. The Orange County kind of like metalcore and all that stuff was all that we just took over. Gone were the DJs and the Jenko pants. Like it was all gone. It was just like girls' jeans and tight t-shirts and and breakdowns.
Totally.
And that and Ken Susi doing push-ups on stage.
Yeah, totally, dude. Oh, Susi, one of my favorite human beings alive, man.
I love Ken so much. He's become one of the greatest friends I have ever had in the past few years. He's literally the best. I love him.
He is the best, dude. And what's crazy is how long Unearth was around before. Because I'll tell you a great Ken Susi story. Overcast was playing. It was my first run with Shadows Fall. So this had to be late 98, early 99. We were playing in Brockton, Massachusetts, and Ken was filling in for his band Diecast on second guitar.
I remember Diecast.
Yeah, and he hands me the first Unearth demo, and he's like, "This is my real band." What I'm doing with these guys is cool. It's cool, but this is my real band.
And that is such a Susi move.
100%. Just like sleazing his way in on someone else's thing and just be like, this is all good, but this is the real shit. And,
absolutely.
And it's fun. Yeah, we drove down and just became like friends that day. And like we've been playing shows together forever. And it's insane. That's what still blows my mind more than the success bands have had is that a lot of the people I grew up doing it with are doing it either still in the bands they were in or new band or in the industry in a way that's hugely influential. And that is something that I'm super proud of is that the dudes who you kind of could tell were lifers from the beginning really changed the way this stuff works in every facet.
Totally.
Like dudes I know who are making videos like have gone on to do crazy stuff. It's insane to see the family tree, the way it's kind of like infected things like a disease. It's great.
Right.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So you mentioned major labels. What was it like for you guys signing to the major label? And because at this time, not many bands, underground metal bands, had signed to major labels. So was there any like concern? Was there any fear or concern of being like a sellout or having fans turn their back on the band or anything like that?
We were not afraid of being sellouts at all. If anything, we're like, no, if we could sell anything, we will, because we were down to make money. We weren't afraid to make money.
Right.
Totally.
But there was a fear of just, will we be able to do what we need to do? And our experience with Atlantic Records was pretty weird, where we had done really well in Century Media, who were, at the time a good size, metal indie, but definitely an indie. And, they had gotten us to the point where we were selling hundreds of thousands of records, not being on a major. And they offered us a deal that was actually, I think, maybe slightly more upfront lucrative than even what Atlantic offered us. But we really wanted to see what we could do with that sort of infrastructure. Now, unfortunately, it was 2006, 2007 when we signed, when the record industry decided to completely implode upon itself. And when we first signed with Atlantic, we went to the New York office, and there's people for miles. There's a million beautiful offices. Everything, they're flying me in, first class and staying at some sick hotel, wasting just money and dumb shit. And we're like, wow, this is amazing. Like, this is going to be incredible. And we signed a super artist-friendly deal. Our lawyer at the time had been Atlantic's contractual lawyer before she went independent. So she knew every trick they were going to try and pull. She got rid of all that. We had complete artistic control. They weren't even going to hear the record till it's done. All that stuff.
Oh, great.
The money was good and enough where we could go and record at Dave Grohl Studio 606 out in LA. We lived there for a while. Got to work with Nick Raskulinix, who's an awesome dude. And all of that was amazing. Where it kind of got weird is right as we finished, our A&R guy, this guy, John Rubley, who's the best dude ever and was like our friend, was like, they're not retaining my services. So our A&R guy was fired before our record came out. And we were handed down to the product manager, who was a great guy, but like was still trying to get his foot in the door. And everyone else had no idea what to do with us. The president of the record label, Jason Flom, was like, at least I'll be here. I've been here since I was putting up Led Zeppelin posters on the streets.
I just met Jason Flom like 3 weeks ago.
Really? That's crazy.
Yes, I swear I just met him.
Dude, we literally sat in his office where he's like, well, at least, I'll always be here for you. And like, he got a golden parachute though, so he was fine. Totally. And awesome,
that is
dude.
Crazy.
Awesome, dude. But there goes our whole bedrock. They were the guys who signed us. They were the ones who believed in what we were doing and wanted to push us. And once that happened, man, it just, kind of took the wind out of our sails. The record did well. It sold, a few 100,000 copies, which was just enough to kick in our second record clause, which pushed the budget to almost double to what we had done before. So we went in there where we're like, hey, look, it's, we can see what's happening here. You guys are totally going to, half the office is empty. There's, you're firing people left and right, downsizing. You now owe us a ton of money to make this album. Cut us a check for a yay amount and we'll call it even. So they cut us a huge, just straight up, just check. Here you go. We split that as a band. We turn around and we sign with an imprint that's owned by Universal, who owns Atlantic Records. So we double dipped where they paid us to go away and then ended up having to fund the record anyway on a much more reasonable and like logical budget, like honestly. Right. But we just pocketed all their money. So financially, it was awesome. Like our Atlantic Records experience was great. But overall, it did hit a speed bump for the band. But I listened back to that record and I think we were thinking too much about it being a major label debut.
Yeah, sure.
Songwriting wise, we were still doing what we do, but I think even sonically, we took some of the teeth out of it a little more than maybe we should have. And that's hindsight stuff. I can hear it now. At the time, we thought we were killing it, Sure. Here we are playing clean guitars through Kurt Cobain's Roland JC 120 amp, just just the greatest thing ever.
Totally.
Yeah, I'm living in LA. We're making a record. This is great, But I think it did, affect a little bit. And that record was, like I said, successful by the metrics. It kind of took a little bit of wind out of our sails. There was also some other background business stuff that delayed things. And, and at that time, if you weren't hitting a record every year and a half, you were going to get forget about. And then the whole industry kind of imploded and, it just was a mess. So there's our major label saga.
I've never had to deal with a major label, but it's crazy how familiar that turnover in personnel story is when you talk to people who have had interactions with major labels and stuff. It just seems so on brand for working with a labal like that.
Well, especially that middle of the 2000s, man, the whole, once everything went where people are like, well, we don't have to buy music anymore. And it just changed everything. So they couldn't just throw money at things to make it work. Stupid things like our first video for Threads of Life, they gave us $100,000 budget. We're like, awesome, we can make 7 videos. And they're like, no, you have to spend it on one. And we're like, well, but that's stupid. And they're like, it's just the way it's earmarked. You got to do it. So we're like,
Right.
our friend Zach, who produces all our videos at the time, we're like, you're about to make a ton of money.
Yeah.
Let's spend it on some fun shit. We got a crane. We'll go to a rooftop. Like, it'll be awesome, But, we would have rather have done 6 videos and made them all super cool. But, like, they just didn't know how to work with a band like us that way. But there was so many funny things that would happen where you're, like, in the Atlantic office and, like, you're next thing you know, just, like, hanging out with Trick Daddy. Just, like, this is crazy,
So nuts.
Is do you think that the record label employees at that level are just that? They're just employees. You get A&R guys down at a indie label, and there's like passion behind it, right? They all come from the music scene. They feel like they have something to prove. Then you get to the major label, and it's just some kid out of college who wants to go in the music business. And do you think that is why the turnover rate is what it is?
Maybe the thing is, that was the thing is the people we originally signed with had been there for a long time and were super passionate. Sure. I think maybe that's what happened as the budgets got cut. They started looking at guys who were like, we're paying this guy a lot of money. We can bring in, like you said, just someone who's just happy to be here and will do what, what we say.
The bare minimum and get it done.
Yeah. So, I think that's a lot of it. Because here's the thing. I've seen indie labels who were sketchier than anything we experienced at a major label as well, but that's usually more on a, they were in it just to do that kind of thing, so I think it can go either way. And nowadays it's so different because the label's role is so different. Whereas before you needed that infrastructure, you had to have it to get your music anywhere. That is so not the case anymore. Where it's great to have people handling things you don't, as a band, want to do, but if you don't need it, you don't need it. It's so different now. So,
is the new Shadows Fall coming out on a label, or are you guys self-releasing it?
We signed with Heavy Monarch, but in a very untraditional way. We signed for a number of songs. You know what I mean? And so we dropped our first single. Just here we go. And we got another one that's about to happen. At some point, I think it will all come out as an album. I want it to be on vinyl by the end, which is really the only physical thing we probably want to do anyway. But it's been nice where they are very realistic about how the world works now. And they've signed such a weird variety of bands where they've got a band like a Squella Grind who's out there touring nonstop, putting out tons of stuff. But then they've also got legacy guys like Ace Frehley and stuff like that. So they're they're willing to whatever makes sense for that artist is fine. And
that's cool.
They've also got financial backing from other weird stuff. Like they've always been the Kids Bop label too, where so they'll always have that money. So they're like, we're not nickel and dime stuff, but we can get creative and put, the focus on the right things depending on what you're trying to accomplish, where you're at in your career, all that stuff. So it's been cool.
That's super cool.
Nice.
That's Epitaph actually, we had discussed maybe going the single route before we started working on our record that came out April of last year, and they were basically like, we'll let you do whatever we want or whatever you want, but we do find that your band, like our band specifically, does sell vinyl really well, and they were like, whatever you do plan to do, you should make sure that you end up with the right number of songs to end up on a physical vinyl release, at which point we're just like, okay, well, we'll just do a record. But I do think it's really awesome that labels are considering these things these days instead of forcing bands into, you have to deliver a record all at once and that's the only way to do things. It's like, well, it's not the only way to do things anymore. You can look at artists like Falling in Reverse, where Ronnie has had tons of massive, hits by just doing the single method. And then when he finally dropped them all on a record, it was like, Josh was like the number 2 record on Billboard or something like that.
It was massive.
It was huge and crazy.
And then you can do all your vinyl releases. You can do all that. If it was up to me, because I don't make the budgets, I would do a 7-inch for every single and then just do a 12-inch at the end of the whole record. But they don't want to spend that kind of money. But but that's because I'm a vinyl collecting nerd. So I want it all, but it really is the only kind of physical thing that matters. But as far as releasing it, if you've got a killer song in the can, why are you sitting on it? That's like our single, the single we just dropped in the Gray. When it was done, we're like, yeah, this is one of the best songs we've ever written. Like, why would we not just share it? You know? And the label was like, cool, man. Yeah, let's get it out. Like, you guys are about to do some shows. You're about to do this. Let's drop the single. We'll get a video for it and, and go from there. And then when the next one's ready, which we're mixing right now, we'll do the same thing. So.
Same thing. Just steadily roll them out.
You mentioned that you guys worked with Nick Raskulinecz on Threads of Life, but you guys have pretty much, not exclusively, but almost exclusively have worked with Zeus, who I've also worked with my old band before, The Ghost Inside. What's that relationship been like between you guys and him, because at this point he's got to be like
another band
basically a sixth band member. Yeah,
He's
exactly.
like another band. And even Fred's a Light, he mixed it. So he was even
there you
involved.
go.
And it was funny because at the time it was tough to be like, do we go and record something? We'd only recorded at his studio. We'd only done that. And we're like, we've got to at least try something different.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, which was exciting at the time. But yeah, Zeus is family, man. And me and him, like, we work together so well that it's such a quick and easy process. He knows how we know how to communicate in a way that just like we're on the same page the whole time. He gets the best out of what I can do. It's awesome. And he's just tone wise, that dude is just like a tone master. Like,
he's yeah, absolutely. He's a full blown wizard. I had a great time working with him, but I just like, yeah, you develop, there's like a special language that you develop with somebody that you spend a lot of time being creative with, where sometimes you don't even have to speak to the person to know what you want out of them. And it just kind of just happens. You know what I mean?
Also don't have to explain certain things. Like if he says pooch and potch, I know he's got to copy and paste something. Like it's like we've got our own language, you know?
Right. And, absolutely.
It's just the way it is, you know? And we've been working with him through all this, and it's also nice now because the way studios are now. Went and do the drums in like a sick, nice room, get everything sounding huge, and then from there we're in Matt's basement, where Zeus will bring over a few preamps or some mics he wants to try, but after that it's like, yeah, man, we can do it wherever we need to do it and work on it whenever we need to work on it, and it's great, man. I'm also happy that he's had such success where like he kind of built up through working with a lot of bands that gave him a shot to like push us to a next level. Like, Hatebreed bringing him along to do their first major label thing and stuff like that, got his name out there. And now he's like Rob Zombie's main dude, just doing all of Rob Zombie's stuff and all the soundtracks and all that. And it's awesome. It's anytime anyone from the home team wins, you're just happy,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I'm curious from a non-creative standpoint, because both of you two are creatives, I'm not. When you work with somebody so long and then you go somewhere else, which is basically outside of your comfort zone, how does that change your approach to writing new music?
Yeah, it definitely, I can hear the effect it had on like Threads of Life, where we might have been not necessarily second guessing, but maybe giving someone else a little more credence than we normally would have maybe before. Sure. Some of that came down to like guitar tones where the producer would be really into something and, John would kind of like, it's cool, but I don't know, maybe we'll try. And then whereas normally he would have probably put his foot down and be like, no, I'm doing this. You're like, well, you know what? You've done so many cool things that I'm a fan of. I'm going to let you try it. And sometimes they would work in a way where we're like, wow, that's way cooler than what we would have done. And other times we're like, maybe we should have just gone with our kind of first instinct. But, it's all a learning process. The one thing I will say that it does, though, is it does take you out of your comfort zone in a good way as well, where it can get real easy to get on a hamster wheel and just churn out kind of the same thing. And we did not want to do that. Like we didn't want to write The War Within Part 2. We wanted to write something very different. And at the time, everyone was getting super mechanical and every record was sounding perfect, which nowadays it's even more ridiculous. So we did a thing where if we played a guitar riff 8 times, they were playing it 8 times in one take. And it's funny. People would be like, it sounds a little sloppy. We're like, no, it sounds like humans.
Right. It sounds like dudes in a room playing their instruments.
A guy playing a guitar, not some Transformer from Cybertron came down and did it, which is what a lot of stuff sounds like now.
It's interesting that you bring that up. And I actually really enjoy a lot of modern production, but I also like I mentioned earlier, I'm heavily inspired by a lot of the bands that were mixed by like the Andy Sneaps and the Colin Richardsons and the Zeuses of the world. And like all of those records have a much more, they're polished, but they're also more human and raw at the same time.
There's a little warmth to it, and there's a little bit of, I think of a lot of it is there's some, the term hardcore kid is like a funny thing because a lot of us are like in our 40s and 50s, but like when you grew up as a hardcore kid, there's a different thing in you. That's just like that you can't, you can't replicate if you didn't grow up as a hardcore kid. There's something in the back of your mind that pushes you in different like directions just because of that inherent influence and that idea of like it's got to be real. Like there's just keep it. But sometimes keeping it real can go wrong, as we all learned from Dave Chappelle. It does happen where sometimes you can stick too much to like something like that and maybe go backwards. But I think it is a part that exists. And it's funny, even on this new Shadows Fall stuff, we're using the live guitar rigs that we used. It's going to sound like us. We didn't do a lot of reamping because we could get lost in the sauce with that stuff where you're like, I'm going to try every tone there is. And then by the end, you're like, I don't know what sounds good anymore.
Yep.
So we're like, no, man,
totally.
we're going to just, we're going to put the hammer down. We're going to play like we do like live. Obviously you're going to fix things and make it all nicey nice, but we want to, we want to keep a band element to it, especially just in thrash metal. One of the things I always loved was the energy. And if you quantize all the energy out of it, it's just, you can't recapture that. So
before we go any further into beyond Threads of Life, I want to jump back real quick because you mentioned earlier that you kind of knew that you guys had really stumbled onto something really exciting sound-wise with The Art of Balance, but The War Within, I think really changed the game for you guys. And I didn't realize until I was kind of, doing the research for this episode that record is, I don't know, at least at one time it was. Is it still the highest selling record on Century Media? Today's show is sponsored by Asesinato Tequila. Behind every great show is a great story. And behind every great story,
a great drink. Asesinato Tequila, award-winning, all-natural, and built for the moments that matter. And now it's easier than ever to get. Just go to thebesttequilaever.com and have it shipped straight to your door. Must be 21 or older. Pour up, tune in, and enjoy the ride. Best enjoyed in good company.
we all know that music isn't just sound, it's connection, it's healing, it's everything when you're feeling lost. That's why lateforloadin is partnering with HeartSupport, the nonprofit founded by Jay Klurs of August Burns Red to bring real, free peer support straight to you.
Are you feeling down and need someone to talk to? Just text lateforloadin to 1-512-647-2871 and get connected with someone who understands, someone who gets how music pulls us through the hardest times. It's totally free, totally judgment-free, and 100% about supporting you through the music we love.
And if you're in a good place right now, you can be part of healing the scene. HeartSupport is looking for volunteer repliers, fans like you who want to help others through the power of music. You'll be trained to support fellow fans who are struggling and join a community built on connection, mental health, and the music that keeps us going.
And again, if you need support, text lateforloadin to the number 1-512-647-2871. If you want to be support, sign up at heartsupport.com/volunteer. Together, we're making this scene stronger.
Today's episode is brought to you by you, our incredible listeners and patrons over at patreon.com/LFLIpod. By joining, you'll get early access to episodes, exclusive monthly giveaways featuring rare memorabilia from Josh and I's time on the road, and access to our patron-only music review and reaction live streams. But that's not all. You'll also get into the Late for Load-In Road Crew Discord, where you can connect with fellow fans, submit guest requests, and drop your questions for the show. The best part? It's just $1 a month. If you love what we're doing and want to help keep the show rolling, head over to patreon.com/LFLIpod and join the road crew today. Now, back to the show.
I don't know if anything has eclipsed it, but it was for a long, long time. If it still isn't, so
that's crazy. And I do think that's justified. Like it was a very, I think, pretty big step forward for you guys and the genre as a whole. Did you feel like there was anything different that you guys did in the way you approached making that record that got you to that point? Or was it just like, the product of a band that had been touring and like honing their craft?
I think it was more that is just, we were a killing machine at that time. We'd been on the road for years. We were super confident in what we were doing. We also did not care what people wanted to hear. We were so focused on creating the sound we'd always wanted to hear. And it's funny, even at that time, I wasn't even listening to almost anything with distortion. I was in a full shoegaze stage. I was just like listening to Spiritualize and My Bloody Valentine and going to Fish shows and like whatever, man, like, just vibing out. And then we made this like super precision thrash metal album, with a, but to me that even in a smaller microcosm, the song "The Light That Blinds" to me is everything we do well. It's like got the acoustic classical interlude and the sweep picking and all the technical stuff, and then it's got groove and thrash and all this stuff, and which is also why we opened the album with that. We're like, here is the roadmap to Shadows Fall, and to see it have success was pretty awesome because it was a very like signature kind of sound we were going for that that was different than even the bands that were our peers. Whereas a lot of people were getting like chuggier and breakdown kind of influenced and a lot more mechanical. We went in a more like classic metal, like kind of old school way. but brought it into a modern kind of era, which is modern. It was now 20 years old, but but yeah, but it did at the idea was that in our minds at the time? Like, no, not at all. We were just grinding and just going. But looking back, we're like, oh yeah, I can hear the confidence. I can hear the just like. This is what we do. Either love it or get the fuck out of the way. Like it's it's just that rock and roll steamroller, So
yeah, for sure.
Love that. Would you say as a thinking back as a hardcore kid growing up, then to receive a Grammy nomination, what does that feel like? I mean, that
young me, like 15-year-old me, if it wasn't on a limited edition 7-inch that was like on a printed paper bag for a cover, and And it was recorded inside of an actual like buzzsaw. Like I didn't think it was real. Like, so it was kind of a weird, kind of coming together of things. But at that time, we also had worked so hard and had not wavered in our commitment to what we wanted to do. If anything, we didn't get let in the door. We kicked the door in from the back and snuck in.
Sure.
And it was our first Grammy nomination was on an independent label, which there was very few of at that time too. We were still in Century Media.
Right.
And so we were super proud of that because we felt like it had been earned, in a way that was it didn't feel like we compromised at all. And it's funny because we always heard from our first demo, people be like, "Oh, these guys are sellouts." They're like, "How can we sell out on our first demo?" Like we didn't have anything to sell from, but we had clean guitars and singing, and So we've been hearing that stuff of like, "Oh, these dudes are just trying to blow up and trying to go mainstream," and we're like, if this is mainstream to you, I would love to see what stream you're living in, because
totally.
Yeah. But it felt pretty. We were comfortable with it. Now, granted, the Grammys themselves were a surreal experience where we pretty much dipped out like early because the party sucked, man. Like we got there early for all the off-camera stuff. There's no food, there's no drinks, there's no anything. We're sitting there all day. Like this is so boring. It felt like you were at like a high school like track and field awards ceremony where we're all sitting in folding chairs while they're calling names at a time. We knew we weren't going to win, so it didn't matter, And then you go into the actual thing. And it starts out great where like the first few performers were pretty decent. And the next thing I know, it's like Brad Paisley's doing like I'll Search You for Ticks song. And I'm like, there's still no food, no drinks. And I was just like, sent a text out like, anyone want to go get Mexican food? And I was like, yep. So we dipped out midway through the ceremony and the parties afterwards. That's different. That was fun.
Sure.
Going to Grammy parties was a blast. Like hitting like the Universal party and all these things. Like it was crazy. I'm sitting there. I'm like talking to someone. People are like, "Do you know who that was?" And I'm like, I have no idea who anyone was. I was in such a bubble. And like, and they're like, "Oh, it was Terry Hatcher from Desperate Housewives." I'm like, I don't know. That's cool. And but what was also cool is I remember we ran into the Death Cab for Cutie guys, and they were kind of in the same way where they're like, anyone who grew up in a van, we can feel comfortable talking to, or like, thank you for being here. And even though we couldn't be more different, sonically, there was such a kinship from just like in the indie world stuff, So it was cool. And then what's weirder is the next year, a few more bands like us were nominated. And then a few years later, it was just, you look at the lineup and you're like, dude, this is Ozfest like lineup. This has been nominated for the metal Grammy. You're like, awesome. So it was cool to kind of start that rolling. But if you would have told me in the Overcast days that 2 members of Overcast would have been nominated for multiple Grammys, I would have never believed you in a million years. So, but now between that Shadows Fall and Kill Switch, it's true. So, oh shit.
Wild.
My phone is about to die. Let me just grab a charger real quick and plug it in.
No
Sorry,
problem.
man. I don't know if you have to pause or anything.
No, you're totally fine. We'll keep on rolling.
Sorry about that, man.
You're good.
Oh, I'm such a professional. See, all these Grammy noms. I'm such a pro. All right, we're back.
Sick. So I think what's something that all of us here can relate to is we're all dads. You have two kids? 2 kids, yeah. I got a 11-year-old daughter and an 8-year-old son. Nice. Do you ever get recognized out in public with them? I mean, you're a pretty easily identifiable guy with the dreads. Do you ever get recognized, and how do your kids feel about that?
Yeah, it totally happens. And honestly, the only reason I do is because of like the hair is kind of hard to hide. Sure. Even if I'll put it in a hoodie and it's still trailing out the back of the hoodie like a tail, so it's actually more noticeable.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll happen where like my daughter's basketball coach was definitely a fan. And she got moved to his roster from the 2 teams she could have been on because he's like, oh no, I'm taking the Shadows Fall kid. You know, and then on my son's soccer team, this surgeon is like, I hate to be this guy, but I literally listen to Shadows Fall, In Flames, and At the Gates like while I'm like cutting people's ankles open and shit. And I was like, that's awesome. So and
that's so sick.
Yeah, and his like assistant had me like sign stuff for him for his birthday for the office and stuff. So and it's cool, and they always think it's pretty funny. They definitely my son leans into my son's a metalhead, man, and it's not even like granted, I'm listening to metal, I'm listening to hardcore around him. They've been to shows, but he's in his own trip where he's like listening to bands I didn't even listen to, like super into Annihilator, super into like Accept, and even some power metal like Hammerfall and Manowar and stuff. So he loves it when that happens, or he's just like all about when people kind of recognize. My daughter, she's, that 11-year-old where she's like, oh, you're embarrassing me,
Right.
Yeah.
So then I lean into it,
Yeah, you have to.
Yeah, of course you do. That's the dad thing to do.
Exactly. You have to. How do you manage being away from your wife and kids while you're on tour?
Thankfully, I haven't been touring for like long periods of time because it would be really tough. Even at the very beginning, when I was still full time, it was really hard. Where I watched my daughter crawl for the first time on Skype. I think I was in Bulgaria. Maybe it was on this Metal All Stars tour, and it's me, Joey Belladonna, and Zach Wilder watching my daughter crawl for the first time on Skype. And I remember just thinking like, I'm gonna miss way too much. And that was the end of full time year-round touring. My son, my wife was pregnant with my son. I was like, I was missing enough of my daughter. I didn't want to miss anything else. So, I kind of made the decision then to not tour full time. And now that they're a little bit older and that we're kind of active again, it's a little bit easier because, they understand it a little bit more, but also I'm never gone for more than a few weeks at a time as it is. So it's been a little bit easier, but that was really, I'd gotten to see the world. I'd gotten to kind of do so many amazing things. I was like, now it's time for me to focus on their lives.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's important because I also missed a ton when my kids were growing up, and you don't get that back. Nope. You know what I mean? Like, and that's just one of those sacrifices that I guess we gave, but we don't get that back.
Nope. Yeah. No, you don't get it back. And honestly, and then also there'll be teenagers who are just mean to you anyway. So it's like, totally. Then I'm down to leave for a little while. So.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to enjoy all the fun stuff while they're still cool and want to hang out with
me. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. So what did post-band life look like for you? Like, what I guess I really want to know is what was the decision like for you guys to bring the band to an end? And then were you scared of what life would look like after that? Because I think that anybody who does this for a living, at some point, it's going to end, right? And you definitely start to, at least I know that, when I think about what the future looks like when my band is done, I'm definitely like, what the fuck am I going to do with myself,
It was pretty scary because you're also like, there's no retirement fund and like things like that for like this kind of lifestyle. Knowing it, we kind of knew we're like, man, we've been grinding hard. I was physically and emotionally pretty burnt out. My neck hated me from just, years of headbanging and all this hair. And John got an opportunity to be in Anthrax, man. And like, I was like, dude, you get to be in the big four. Like, I can't deny that. And we balanced it at first for a little while between the two, but also we were, our momentum had died a ton where we're doing okay. And we, like I said, we could have kept going and dragging it along. But we'd also seen some of the bands the bands that we came up with, Chimera and God Forbid were kind of going through similar things at the time. And we didn't want to get to the point where we were like bummed about the shows we were playing,
Sure.
And it was getting to where we're like, we just don't know. And we didn't also, as a lineup that had been the same for so long, getting fill-in guys for John was weird. And then, I was like planning, about to get married and just kind of was like, maybe it's time to take a break away from things. And, but I was definitely scared because I was like, I don't know how to do much else. Like, I'm sure I can learn it, but this is all I've done for, at that point, it had been, 25 years or so just of really being on the road or in some capacity. So it was a little nerve wracking. And honestly, for the first year, thankfully, I had saved a lot of that major label money that I talked about. I had just put it all into high interest savings or CDs and a few investments and was like,
smart.
I have a bubble. I was like, I don't need to go to work right away. So for a year, honestly, me and which at the time was my fiance, we just kind of kicked it, and it was
That's
really
awesome.
nice. It was really nice. And, but then I was like, okay, you can only take it for so long. And luckily through skateboarding, because skateboarding brings me everything, brought me music, and then it brought me a job. I was skateboarding with a friend here who worked at this company, St. Louis Music, who owned Alvarez acoustic guitars and Dixon drums and a bunch of other brands. I was like, hey, this guy's retiring. Would you be interested? And I was like, I'll give it a shot. And I've been there now for 7 years or so. And
way.
yeah, so it's great. And got to kind of keep one foot in the music world. Granted, it's in sales type of stuff as opposed to performing, but it's kind of still going to NAMM, and stuff.
Right.
Which is on the other side of the
that's
table.
cool.
So that was cool. That worked out really kind of fell into it and worked out well. And then once the kids were around, I was like, yeah, I was getting way more settled in and finding something new. But I always had the itch to play. So of course, the next thing I was in a band here in St. Louis, like jamming, and Hell Nights is a blast. We'll still play occasionally. We've done like a show this year. We may do another one next year, but we'll see. But it's fun to still jam with some guys. And then once enough time had kind of passed, we all started, Shadows Fall guys all started talking together. We're like, if we're going to play again, it's kind of becoming the time, and of course, then the pandemic hit right when we planned our first show.
Yeah.
So
Naturally.
that pushed everything off by another year and a half or so. But then, now we're able to do it on a level that's comfortable with everyone's current life. The guys who have families, they're able to do it when it makes sense and have some fun. The guys who are playing in other bands are able to kind of schedule it around their main gigs and all that. So it's worked out really well. But yeah, there was a time where I was like, the ego hits tough, man. When you're like the first time you have a shitty day at work, you kind of are like, man, I used to be at Download Festival and playing with Iron Maiden.
Totally.
And now I'm yelling at some guy because his shipment of $200 acoustic guitars is late. And I was like, fuck this.
Right.
Like, I don't want to go. Get me back in the pirate ships.
I've always been curious about this and how guys deal with this post, on the other side of the music career. I don't want to say post music career because it still exists, but the other side of it, like on this one hand, you're Brian from Shadows Fall, right? You're a fucking badass rock star essentially, right? And then on this hand, you're just normal Brian Fair at a normal job. Like, how does one deal with that? How, because that ego is inside of all of us.
It's
right?
It's tough, man.
How do you deal with that?
It is an ego thing too. That's what it's you start to realize, you start to be like, hey man, do you know who I am to yourself,
Yeah. Because wait a minute, I'm fucking cool.
Yeah.
Like what, but
totally. But and there was definitely
fuck.
some darkish periods through that of having to kind of come to terms with that, because it was a very whiplash kind of feeling, as far as like, it goes from this nonstop world of chaos and all that to just something that's everyone else would consider a normal day, but to me, I'm just like, oh, this is what I always wanted to avoid. But then,
right.
You find the joy in that everyday stuff as well. And also start to realize, like, man, you got to live a life of super adventure that other people would kill for, but also they didn't see all the shitty stuff that comes along with it too.
Totally.
Like,
totally.
Man, as much fun as a lot of it was, and as many stories I have, 90% of it is sitting around somewhere waiting, or being stuck somewhere you can't get to, or being in some miserable situation. So, or using the world's worst toilet somewhere, and like,
sleeping in some uncomfortable ass position,
shitting in a hole in Italy,
totally.
Literally, shitting in a hole in Italy, like trying to keep those quads working while you're trying to squat, or sleeping in a like a squat in fucking Germany with a bunch of punk rock dudes on a mattress that should have been burned, like all that stuff. And even just the day-to-day grind of it, when you're just moving nonstop, it has an effect on you. So, there was some of that I realized that I hadn't realized how much it had taken out of me until I had time to kind of recharge the batteries. And even emotionally, like where I was like, I'm
totally,
I was sick of getting pulled in different directions. I was, it's funny, years ago on the War Within record, I wrote a song called Inspiration on Demand. And I had nothing left to say at the time as well. I was starting to recycle ideas. I was just like, I'm not a doll you can just pull the string in the back and make lyrics come out of anymore. I was like,
Right.
I needed time away. I needed a new life experience to write about, and things like that. So taking that time was essential. I don't think I would, if I would have kept touring, I either would have fully burnt out, like in a some sort of flame out way, or had a mental breakdown, like most likely. And so I was, luckily things did kind of work out progressively the way that it needed to. And now I'm fully inspired. Like, writing music again is a joy as opposed to a job. And there's just a whole new appreciation. Every show, it's so funny. Like, I see these photos from the shows we've just played recently, and the smiles like are hilarious on all of us. Like, we're you know, like probably in the middle of some just nasty rip, and we're all just like, just like cheesing, and because we really appreciate what it is. And honestly, to have people care about something you created years ago that impacted them is hugely inspirational as well, and satisfying in a different way.
Yeah.
That's really cool to see the kind of legacy we created and that we're still adding to as well. It's cool. It's sometimes you don't always want the perspective, but it's usually good when, even if it's forced upon you.
Right. Definitely.
Well, you've brought up the new song you guys released in December, right? So just like a month ago.
Yep.
And it's the first song you guys released in 12, 13 years. It's been a minute.
Yep.
Was writing and putting out new music always part of the plan when you guys started tossing around the idea of playing again, or did that just naturally come after you guys got back in the same room together? It
happened quick, as far as like when the first show that the first reunion show, like we just were like, let's just get through the show.
Sure.
Let's, and it's funny, man. I hate to say it because we were a terrible band about rehearsing. We did not rehearse for shit when we were an active band. Because we're always like, we know these songs, we play them every night on stage.
Sure.
We rehearsed insanely for that reunion show. And we realized, like, oh, wow, we're a lot better when we rehearse.
Isn't it crazy how that works?
We should have been doing this for decades, Like, who would have known? Practicing makes you better at what you do.
I wish somebody would have told me sooner.
I know. So we hit that stage like a killing machine, man. And physically, I got in probably the best shape of my life. I've gotten really more into that in general. And so that was cool, but we wanted to just get through that show. But immediately afterwards, we were already talking like, hey, man, we should if we've got ideas, we should kick them around. And John, because in Anthrax, he's the lead guitar player. He writes his solos, but Charlie and Scott are writing the riffs. So he had a stockpile of riffs. And my main thing was right out of the gates, I'm like, it's gotta be Shadows Fall. Like, granted, we don't want to repeat ourselves over and over, but like, it's got to sound like us for it to be Shadows Fall. And he's like, I got Shad riffs, man. He's like,
let's go.
And he had an arsenal of Shad riffs. So once we started jamming, after every rehearsal, we would start working on new stuff. And those guys started sending me skeletons and stuff, and then we'd work on them, and then it started flowing like super well. So once the kind of jam burst, it's just this has been some of the easiest writing we've done since probably the real early days. Feels like that again. So I think that's that time away makes it like that, because they always say your first album you wrote forever. And your second album, you only had a year to write, So we're back in that like kind of feeling of like, man, we got time to write the best stuff we can.
So you guys were writing this like the old school way, get in the room and jam together type of.
Yeah, those guys were. I'm a little further away, so when I was there, we would. But when those dudes get together, actual jam, and especially I know Paul writes his bass parts a lot better when he's actually jamming than just playing along at home to the riffs. So he can lock in with the drums and get all that. So that's a huge part of the writing process. And they work on all the transitions. John might have like a roadmap in his mind, but once they start jamming, all the twists and turns come. And then then you get Zeus involved, and then it goes to another level. So Zeus ain't afraid to tell you, like, kind of shot, man. Shot.
All right, Brian, let me tell you that I feel a little bad for Zeus, because when my old man went to work with him, we brought him our worst record, and he did a lot of telling us that shit sucked. And at the time, it definitely hurt to hear. But when I listened back to it, I was like, he was right. We should have trashed the whole fucking record. He's definitely not afraid to tell you, though, and I appreciate that.
He is not afraid. It's funny because out of the few guys that work, Zeus, he's not afraid to tell you all. I've only done a few things with Adam D, but no one is more brutal than Adam D. You'll do what you thought was the best take, and he'll just like all of a sudden you hear him through the thing, just like laughing and just clicks on the talkback. Nope. You know, it's just like,
well, that's because that dude's a fucking machine. He's not human,
but that's
man.
what I try to always tell him. Like, no one can do the things you do, so don't hold us to that standard. That's not fair.
Right.
You know, you're a fucking genius.
He's one of one. Nobody else can be Adam D. Like, give us some slack,
the world
man.
can't handle the world can't handle two Adam Ds. No way. No way.
I mean, I'd be interested in giving it a shot, but it would definitely be scary.
Yeah, no, he's the best. But yeah, he will drive you. But both, and honestly, that's a good producer should be pushing you. But yeah, so once we started writing, things flowed real well. Once we got to the Zeus part of it, where we did some like live demos with him, that really tightened things up. And having the agenda-free approach, where I say agenda-free, at some point the label's going to be like, "Oh, we did give you money. Like you gotta give us all the songs." But there's not that deadline pressure, and that's
that's
huge,
nice.
You know, we may need to put one in at some point just to finish. You know?
Well, yeah. Like both ways can be dangerous. Having a deadline, you start cutting corners to meet the deadline, but also not having the deadline, you start just taking your sweet old time, and nothing ever gets done.
I'm not trying to Chinese democracy the album, you know. Like, I don't want to do that. So you know, But it's been a nice, relaxing approach to writing, which I think if it wasn't like that, I don't know if we would have really put out a lot of new music. So yeah, we're in as good a spot as I can imagine us being right now, where we're getting to play these incredible festivals, which thank God there's US festivals now. Like that's such a different thing than when we were active full time. And then we're getting to hop on a few shows here and there. And then we're finally doing our first extended touring in May with Killswitch Engage, which it's only a couple weeks, but for us, it'll be the longest thing we've done since 2014. So and they're our brothers. Like we've all been in bands together through the years. So that will be about as good as it gets for us, to go out with those guys.
Those shows are going to be, they'll be massive too.
I can't.
I got to be honest. I'm a little pissed though, because it doesn't come to Maryland. And so I'm going to need to speak to somebody about why I didn't get a show in my backyard. That's a little
Who's the agent? Who's the agent?
Yeah, you can put it in the comment section with everyone else who's mad about all the other places.
Oh yeah. That's good. That's a good idea. That's a good idea.
That's definitely the most effective way to handle it.
It is funny because it is hitting some pretty random places where people are like, how are you not taking this tour to like LA and New York? And we're like, no, man, sorry, man. We're going to like South Carolina to Myrtle Beach and like,
right.
other places.
Are you guys going to do more touring, or do you think that that's going to be it? Or are you going to just kind of do this and see how it feels?
We're going to pick and choose our battles pretty wisely. Mostly a lot of it is I'm going to be working this tour with paid time off and probably doing some remote work while I'm on the road.
Sure.
So until someone wants to cover my health insurance and all that, I'll only be able to tour as much as I can. Our bass player's in a similar situation, whereas the other dudes, we also have to work around Anthrax's schedule with John. Thankfully, they're in a kind of writing, recording state right now. So this year we've been able to do some more stuff. We're going to try and do as many festivals as we can, because those and long weekends. I want to start doing more long weekends where we'll do like a Midwest run of like Chicago, St. Louis, Kansas City. And then do like LA, Phoenix, just some sort of little West Coast run. And then, I'd love to do it. We tried to do Florida stuff around the Lamb of God boat thing we did. We just couldn't work it out like logistically. And and thank God for Lamb of God starting to cruise. I was like, that was the coolest thing I've ever done. I'm like, dude,
that shit's cool, right?
Yeah, I love that all our friends are like, big and rich now, so they can take us on boats. Great.
Speaking, I want to go back to the old days of touring. Like, I want to hear before MapQuest and
dude.
GPS, like
the old Overcast printing out, dude. I'm printing out. You're even ahead of. We had literally the first Overcast tour. We had one of those AAA triptychs, which is one of those maps that has like a yellow like highlighted line of your route. Each of these shows. But the problem was these shows were at places like, like Josh Grabell's basement, and like, they weren't like clubs half the time, and a record store somewhere in Florida, I'll never forget the first time we showed up at a place that we thought was a club called The Barn, and it was just a barn. And the next day we were playing a place called The Doghouse. I was like, God damn it, this better not be an actual fucking doghouse. I don't know how we found half of these places. I don't know how we found them. You're on a payphone, calling a phone number that it usually ends up being some 17-year-old kid's parents' house, because that's who booked the show. And or getting there and they're like, so you guys brought a PA, right? We're like, oh, God damn damn it. No.
This
Yeah,
this is the type of shit that I want this new generation of bands to understand,
totally.
because they have it, I guess, while in one hand they may have it harder, in another hand they have it so much fucking easier.
Right now, it's harder to stand out in a oversaturated world of instant gratification and all that. Where they have it easier is they know where they're fucking going because some voice is telling them to take a right, you know, like, and you know, like,
and if you miss it, they're gonna reroute you.
Yeah.
Literally, we were doing a trick where one of us had a calling card that we couldn't really use, so we would be like, "Here's a collect call from meet us at the," you know, like, and you just scream the address, you know, like, and then it would hang up, you know. So like,
yeah.
We were using dialers. I don't know if you ever heard those things. Those are things you could put to a payphone and it would fake the sound of the quarters so you could call places. Yep. Like that's how ghetto we were, man. Like, you know.
No, I didn't hear about that. That's crazy.
Yeah, so like we were any way we could survive. We were, and at that time being like vegetarian and vegan dudes touring around, like we were like eating dirt, you know, and stuff. Like now these people are just falling into like everyone's got a veggie option, everyone's got everything. We're like, nah, man, like.
What did you guys do when you first started touring in Europe? Like, how did you communicate back home, or did you?
Yeah, we did. The first full European tour Shadows Fall did, we were opening for Kitty, the band, you know, Kitty from Canada.
Yeah, and they got to come back too.
Yeah, dude, and they're killing it. It's awesome. That band hooked up so many bands. You have no idea. They took out so many bands at a time where they were coming up when they were like riding high, and they bring us out, and they took us over to Europe. And so we get there, and Century Media, we were signed by the U.S. office, and we were the first band that was signed exclusively by the U.S. office. And the European office wasn't all that stoked on the idea. And so when we got there, they gave us this kind of van thing that, like,
that's a good start to describe it.
It was such a mess, and our gear was so shot because they just did not want to spend any money. And thank God the girls in Kitty were like giving us like any food and water and beer they could. And we had to end up using our first night. We plugged all our amps in, everything blew. All the fuses blew. They're dead in the water right before we went on. They let us plug in all their backline and use everything. And they gave our label gave us 2 boxes of CDs. We sold out in the first night. We sold out all of the boxes because they're also like, this tour's not gonna be that big. We don't want to pay for your plane tickets. We're like, Kitty's like got a gold record. Like, what are you talking about? Like, they're doing well. The first show, there's 2,500 or 3,000 people there. It's insane. We kill it. Sell out all our CDs. We're like, hey, we need more CDs. They're like, that's all we printed. We're like, what?
Oh shit!
So they had to scramble and print everything. So thankfully, we started, our momentum was going up. A few of the people came to some of the shows. The UK office was very behind us. The mainland Europe, not as much. We went to a meeting there, and the president of the label came in and just tore everyone a new asshole. And was like, guys, this is the future. This is what's happening. This is the future. Get with, like, we got. I don't care who signed them. I don't care why you don't want to do this. Get these guys what they need. Get them back on the road. Let's go. Let's, And thankfully, and it ended up being an awesome tour. But it was a shit show from the beginning. But if you don't go through those things, everything's too, you can't have things easy. And nothing was easy for us. Like, if it could go wrong, it went wrong.
Sure.
Wheels flying off of buses, like anything that could happen happened.
Yeah, I have a hard enough time going to like Europe or Australia now and just staying in contact with the wife and kids with the time change in those areas and having the ability to FaceTime in the palm of my hand at all times. I can't imagine going over there without any way to communicate with home on a regular basis at all.
Us. Yeah, not a single cell phone between us. No,
that's nuts. I can't even imagine that.
Just
I would be afraid to even go out and like sightsee because I'd be like, what if I can't like find my way back to the bus and I can't talk to anybody?
Leave the breadcrumbs, like leave a little layer.
Sure.
But it was funny, like literally going to an internet cafe to like just email like the world and be like, we're still alive,
Sure.
I will say it did kind of progressively get better from there, but those first few European runs, like you said, like having no communication, having no idea of anything. We didn't have a European tour manager, so we're just kind of like flying by the seat of our pants, man. And it was chaos. And we didn't have budget for hotels, and we were in a van, so we're just crashing at anyone's house we could. And some of those situations got hairy as hell.
Awesome.
Some of the best stories are from that. Granted, most of them are locked in the vault somewhere. But
sure,
coming up like that was great because anytime we got a little bit of comfort, it was like the best thing ever. So, I remember
you appreciate it so much more.
Yeah, you get catering the first time. You're like, oh my God, that's something that happens. Like, that's insane. So, then we were spoiled rock stars by the minute, after a while, so, going to Grammys and stuff, but.
Sellouts.
Have you had a hard time? Yeah. Have you had a hard time adapting to the way social media has taken over music industry?
Yeah. And we were pretty slow to it. And didn't want to do it at the beginning. Our manager at the time he's the guy who now does strictly internet marketing and stuff for all these, whether it's restaurants and brands and stuff like that. So he was pretty like knowing like this is where it's going. And we were just like, we were so lazy with anything but performing and writing that we were even bad at press at the time when it was easy. So for us to be content creators just wasn't really an option. And I've embraced it somewhat. I'm still probably not doing as much as I should, but it's changed everything now. So if you're not a content creator, you're not going to be successful in any sort of artistic venture these days. It's tough, but it's also created ones who are only content creators like as well. So it's like, hey man, at some point you just can hang up the, retire from the band and just go strictly social media. So it's definitely crazy. The one thing that's awesome though, is I will say, is the communication direct to fans is always amazing. I'm the type of guy at any point in our band, no matter where we were at the bar or at merch table the second we were done hanging out. We were never a high on the bus band. We were never a green room band. We were hanging out, man, which is what I loved. I traveled because I wanted to meet new people and go to new cities and experience that stuff. So that's one thing I do enjoy about that, is that there's, that immediate direct contact you can have with people who are into the band or into what you're doing, and having more than just, a little post on a message board. You can actually communicate back and forth and all that stuff. So that's cool to me. That's one of the things that's opened up. I also do like that it's allowed bands that didn't have another outlet, an immediate outlet to like release stuff without, as we talked about with record labels not being the same as you need them. It's such a cool thing that people can be like, this is what I'm doing right now. It's out there, So it's cool. It's a double-edged sword for sure, but it's got a lot of benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious, if we took music and Shadows Fall out of the picture completely, who is Brian Fair? If there's no music at all and no Shadows Fall, who's Brian Fair?
Oh man, if I would known they existed, I would have been a bitter guy. But honestly, I probably would have focused more on writing and possibly even some sort of journalism. I was originally a photojournalism major at school, but I ended up graduating with a literature degree. So I'd probably just be hopefully focusing on writing, and I probably or I would have full on gone yogi on the top of a mountain somewhere, like just meditating for days on end, and just
would have really put those dreads to use.
Totally, just communing with nature. But who knows? My dream would have been to be a pro skater, but man, I knew that was out of the window in middle school. I was like, man, people are just crazy. They're too good.
I mean, dude, and looking at the kids who are like the up and coming like big name skaters now, it's like, I mean, they're the kids who grew up playing like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater video games, right? And then they do those tricks in real life.
Yeah, I think you can do it in real life. I watched some like 10-year-old kid was doing 900s like on vert. And I'm like, I'm looking at that ramp. I'm like, I wouldn't have dropped in that at any point in my life, much less that I could do a 900 of them.
Yep. Right. I don't know if you've seen him. There's a younger guy named, it's Andy something. And I just saw him on a podcast with Rodney Mullen, and he's like the new age Rodney Mullen, but the stuff he's doing makes Rodney Mullen look like he's never touched a skateboard before. It's crazy.
It's crazy
what kids are doing now.
It's insane. And they're taking it to such a level where I'm like, I keep thinking like, all right, it's got to like peak out where where can you take it? And someone's like, no, don't worry.
Nope.
We're going for
watch this.
So, it's crazy. So
listen, today, if you were given 5 minutes to talk to Brian from Overcast, what would the message be?
Ooh, let's see. It would be, make sure you get out and explore every city, every country, and every place you end up in. Don't be lazy. That's one, I won't even call it a regret, but one thing I would change when I was on tour is I would have explored places a lot deeper, like not just kind of wandering around. I would have tried to actively plan things and see more of the world, because there's a lot of countries I've been to that like I didn't see anything besides backstage or like just the venue or the immediate area. Some of it was because of logistics, some of it was laziness though. And or like being like, oh man, I'm just too hungover, or I was caring more about the party than going out and doing some cool stuff. And that's something that I would go back and tell me, like, you don't miss any of those advantages, like see everything, meet people like off the grid, get out there and really like get in deep.
It's real easy to get in the mindset of like, we tour XYZ area every 6 months. I'll be back here again. It's really easy to fall into that and be like, I'll do it all next time. What if there's no next time,
But that's the thing. We went to some places, like I remember 2 places in particular that guys stayed on the bus and slept, and I couldn't believe, like, we went to Stonehenge one time, and granted, we went to Stonehenge early in the morning. We had a late loadout, so we were fucking dead ass tired. But dude, how many times Stonehenge is not like a place that's it's easy to get to.
No,
it's like on the way from point A to point B.
You make a commitment to get there.
I had our driver stop for us to spend like 15 minutes there, whatever it ended up being, and guys stayed asleep. And it's like, man, you may never get to go there again. And the second one, we went to Dachau, the concentration camp. And guys stayed on the bus and didn't want to see that. And
it's crazy.
I also tell young bands that I have going to Europe now, like, just don't take it for granted and get out there and explore as much as you can.
See everything you can, like, and I did a good amount of that, but not as much as I should have. And I think back, and a lot of it was, like you'd say, you'd be like, I'm tired. We'll be, another time will happen. But it's like, no, it might not, and you may never get back to these places. And the fact that someone's covering the expenses for you to be here, like, because that's the thing. Now I look at, I'm like, I would love to go back to Australia, and I like, you Google some plane tickets. You're like, well, that's not going to happen,
I think I'll wait. Maybe Shadows Fall does an Australian run.
It's crazy. So I'm like, take advantage of that. That's definitely one of the things I would 100%. Say. And honestly, try and keep a better journal of it, because man, there's so many times where if other people didn't give me secondhand stories to keep my own memories alive,
it's gone,
totally. Man. And so I would see everything. Be like, you need to see everything you can and keep track of it all. So
totally. Well, listen, before we wrap this up, we do one last thing. It's a lightning round. We call it our day sheet questions. We're building a day sheet.
Nice.
Chris will fire these off, and just first thing that comes to your head, that's your answer.
Sounds good.
All right. What is your favorite album of all time?
Ooh, Spiritualized, Laser Guided Melodies.
Okay. Best concert you've ever attended as a fan? I'll even say it could be the best concert you've ever played, even.
Metallica and Justice for All tour, Worcester, Massachusetts, with The Cult on Sonic Temple opening.
Wow.
And that's going to be the end of this episode because I'm fucking jealous.
It was incredible. And The Cult was so loud.
My favorite band of all time, touring on my favorite record, and I was not even born yet, and so I didn't get to see it. And now I'm pissed.
I saw the Injustice for All tour twice. They came through Worcester twice because they toured for so long. The first time was with Queensryche on the Operation Mindcrime, and the second time was with Cult Sonic Temple. It was
wow.
It was the greatest thing. It was the greatest thing ever.
Chris has to go.
Yeah, I'm gonna say, Brian, I started this episode as a gigantic fan of your band, and now I fucking hate you. So that's that. All right. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Okay. What would be a dream collaboration for you? It could be any artist alive or dead.
Oh, any artist alive or dead. Jerry Garcia.
Okay. All right. Back in the touring days, what was one thing you couldn't live without on tour?
Ooh, couldn't live without baby wipes.
You're a man after my own heart. I know. All right. I like you again. We're good. We're on good terms again. We fixed this right now. All right. Number one bus rule.
No shitting on the bus.
There it is. Favorite city and or country to eat?
To eat. Ooh. Almost anywhere in Italy. Almost anywhere in Italy.
Do you have a hobby that might surprise people? Is there a secret hobby that you have?
Secret hobby? I wish I had something cool, but no, not really. Exercising these days. That's the only hobby. High intensity interval workouts.
Let's go. You know what?
Nice.
I support it.
Nice.
Favorite superhero?
Ooh.
And there is a correct answer to this also. So don't ruin what we got going on here, Brian.
I have to be honest. My favorite comic book, I was a big comic book guy. My favorite comic book was Luke Cage and Iron Fist, which is pretty random, but that's who it was.
You know what? Not what I was expecting, not the answer I was looking for, but I will accept. That's totally
Chris
fair.
is a Batman guy.
I'm a
He's
gigantic Batman
sleeve.
fan.
Oh, man. I was way more of a Marvel guy. And I was a huge, I was way into X-Men and all that stuff. But for some reason, my comic book store had a bargain bin and they were all these Luke Cage and Iron Fist comics for like $1. I bought all of them and I got obsessed. So then when they made TV shows out of them, I was so confused. I was like, no one likes this but me. I was like, who are you making these shows for?
you. I was making it for you.
Psyched, but So.
Who would be on your Mount Rushmore of artists?
Music artists?
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Jerry Garcia. I'm sorry, I'm a huge deadhead. Jerry Garcia. Peter Tosh. More of a Tosh guy than Bob Marley. Paul Di'Anno, the late great Paul Di'Anno. More of a Di'Anno guy than Dickinson guy. Randy Rhoads. And last one's tough. Jay Spaceman from Spiritual Last.
Sick. All right, the next one, don't feel bad about your answer because I guarantee you my answer to this will be more embarrassing than anything you could say. The longest you've ever gone without a shower on tour.
Oh, man, I don't even count. Definitely in the 2-week area for sure.
Okay, so you and I would have a very similar answer then?
Mine was 14 days.
Yeah, I'm right around the 2-week mark, and I'm not proud of that, but it did happen.
No, there were times where it had to happen, where we would, I remember getting routing and being like, shit, we're not going to shower until, this one, you'd be like, oh, we're playing the Norba. All right, the Norba has a shower.
Yeah, right.
Awesome. And we were never big truck stop shower guys. That just wasn't a thing we did a lot. There were definitely some times where, but I also, as I've mentioned, I was a deadhead and I used to do fish tour and all the hippie stuff. So I've been dirty forever. So that doesn't happen without a little dirt.
Sure. What's the weirdest gift you ever got from a fan?
Weirdest gift I've ever got from a fan. In Japan, I got these weird little dolls that were they're almost like bells. They had like a bell inside them, and they literally looked like someone in a mental ward had made them. They were eerie as hell. And they're in a box somewhere upstairs. So that was bizarre. But what I love about Japan is everyone gives you gifts. It's crazy. In America, they're asking you, "Can I have your guitar, man?" And in Japan, they're bringing you gifts. It's amazing.
Right. That's awesome. It's cool that you still have it too. That's awesome.
Oh yeah. They're awesome. They're up in the archives. I'm a pack rat. I keep too much of that shit.
Me too. You don't want to go in my basement. Last one for you. What would be your pro wrestling entrance music?
Ooh. What would be the music? See, I already know my name and my finishing move. But which I've always.
Well, let's hear it, because you would make a cool ass looking wrestler.
Yeah, seriously, I would be the Buffalo Soldier. And I have to come out the Buffalo Soldier by Bob Marley, and then my finisher, is I would take out a chillum and blow a huge hit of smoke in a dude's face, and while they're dazed, I stun them.
Nice.
You know what? That's a way more effective finisher than the fucking mandible claw or whatever the fuck it was that Mankind would do back in the day. You're already a way cooler wrestler than him.
Imagine it with a dirty sock though, then it's even more effective.
Yeah, but that's not fucking hurting anybody. It's just so disgusting.
Funny. It's so great.
How I am actually curious. Does the hair not mess you up skating?
It can. I usually tie it up a little bit. But I've definitely come in the first time I really noticed it. I did a big frontside ollie on. It was probably like a 4 or 5 foot mini ramp, not huge, but enough where you could pump. Yeah. And I definitely ran over some of my hair because I was kind of I came in kind of
yeah.
And I felt and I was like, what was that? And they're like, that was your hair, dude.
That was you.
Yeah. So it can when it gets out, if I have it tied up and it gets out, it messes with the peripherals. So I'll but it's definitely it's a safety hazard in many ways.
Right on. Well, on that note, dude, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. This has been fucking fun. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to sit down with us dorks and just nerd out. Yeah, it is night. But the listeners don't need to know it's nighttime right now.
He took his time out of his night.
All right, fair enough. Whatever.
It's been awesome, man. No, for real. It's always it's fun to kind of go through some of the memory lane stuff, but also just I'm really proud of what we created and accomplished. So the fact that people are still interested and care, it means a lot. So yeah, man, happy to catch up and happy to talk some shads.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we get out of here, you said there is a new song coming. Is there a timeline on that, or what should people be looking out for?
We're probably gonna drop it before that Kill Switch tour, I assume.
Okay.
But we're in the kind of mixing stage right now. adding a few little vocal overdubs and harmonies and stuff right now. But so hoping to get it out soon. And then the next major thing on the calendar is that Kill Switch run. And and then from there, who knows? But it'll be up on all our social media stuff and everywhere, so it'll be out there. But I'm very excited. The new song is very different than the first song, which that's what I'm very happy about too. The first one was a straight up 3.5 minute thrasher. This one's a little bit eerier, darker, a little sludgier. So I'm pretty psyched.
Sick. Very cool, man. Well, Brian, thank you so much for hanging out with us, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for the time.
Have a great night, man.
Indeed, man. You guys as well. Good times.
Hey everyone, Chris here, and I just wanted to take a second to say thanks for watching today's episode. You can check out more episodes of Late for Load-In on the right side of your screen and find any applicable links to this episode in the description down below. There you'll also find a link to our Patreon, which is the most direct way to support the show, and it's only $1 a month. Please consider giving this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and be sure to follow us on all social platforms, at Late for Load-In, at Chris_TGI, at Josh Carell. See you guys next week.